Picture this. A small, quiet town in Alabama, a decorated officer loved by everyone, and a dangerous inmate no one could trust. But what happens when their worlds collide in a whirlwind of secrets, risk, and love? This isn't your typical crime story. This is Love on the Run, the unbelievable true story of a daring prison escape, a shocking romance, and a desperate chase across state lines. In today's videos, we're going to deep dive into this twisted tale of love and betrayal that will leave you questioning everything you thought that you knew about the lengths people go for love. Hello everyone, and welcome to That's My Opinion. My name is Bacon Bears, and in today's video we are unpacking every single shocking moment that was in the Netflix documentary Love on the Run. We're uncovering what makes this story so captivating and exploring how love can sometimes lead us to the most unexpected places. And if you think you've seen it all when it comes to love stories, buckle up, because this one might just change your mind. Also, if you like what you see here, don't forget to like and subscribe so that you don't miss anything. And let's dive in. The Florence Lauderdale Detention Center is an extremely rough environment. And that's where we find Vicky White, a nurturer, extremely sweet, very giving, kind, understanding, really gives people the benefit of the doubt and wants to believe in the best for people. She's had 17 years on the job as an assistant director, and she's in charge of everything from the day to day, and extremely hard worker. She's the first one in, the last one to leave, and sometimes even works weekends. One day, Vicky was in charge of taking a very dangerous inmate, Casey White, to the courthouse, but they never came back, nor did they make it to the courthouse. Now, Florence, Alabama is a very small town. It's in the Bible Belt. It's kind. It's friendly. Everybody knows everybody. And the people are just really sweet. Vicky was someone who the other workers aspired to be like. She was tough on her job, but kind to the inmates. She understood that they were people and treated them as such. She treated everyone like they were somebody, and that's coming from one of the former inmates. She really thought that people were in prison because they had fallen on bad times, not because they were bad people. Vicky was married to her high school sweetheart, Tommy, and they had a pretty good relationship, but unfortunately she ended up getting divorced due to drug use, and after that she actually got engaged again. But unfortunately her fiance was tragically killed in a car accident. She never remarried or had children of her own, but she was a nurturer by nature, and she just knew how to take care of people. She was a mother figure to the inmates, a mother figure to some of the inmates that have never experienced that. She was soothing and comforting and compassionate. Everyone called Vicky. Everyone went to Vicky. Everyone turned to Vicky. Everyone leaned on Vicky. And she, in turn, took care of absolutely everyone. But the question becomes, who takes care of her? August of 2020, Casey White came to Florence Lauderdale Detention Center for crimes such as shootings, carjackings, and home invasions, and capital murder, which he confessed to. He was considered an extremely dangerous inmate. For example, in 2015, he shot at his girlfriend after breaking into her home and then proceeded to kill her dog. Then he goes to the neighbor's house, threatens the neighbor with a gun because he needs his car keys, and the neighbor gave them to him, which, yeah, of course, yes, take my car. Then he drove to a rest area, tried to steal another car from a couple, but they were like, yeah, no. And they tried to drive off, to which Casey did not like, so he shot through the back of the window, hitting a woman in the shoulder, which she survived. Thank God. So then Casey goes to another man at the rest stop, puts a gun in his face, takes his car, and I guess the guy was like, can you at least leave me my cell phone? To which Casey was driving off, backs up, leaves his cell phone, and then goes on a high-speed chase. The police are following him. Casey completely wrecks the car. He gets out, he holds two guns to his head, and the police go in to negotiate, which this is all on body cam footage, and watching it was nuts. And one of the police is like, Casey, because he knows him. Casey's been in and out of jail for years. And he's like, Casey, what are you doing? And Casey's like, tell my mama I'm not coming home. And the police officer's like, Casey, nobody's going to die here today. What do you need? And Casey tells him that if you get me a sun drop, I'll put the guns down. And a sun drop is a soda. So they get him a sun drop and they get him in the car and he goes to jail. All of that. And all he asks is for a soda. None of it is funny, but I have to tell you, like, the way these people are interacting because they know each other on this body cam footage, I was like, what am I watching? Casey was a man who was in and out of the prison system for a really long time. But because of the crowding issues, they couldn't really accommodate for Casey. Casey White should have been in isolation, but they were unable to provide that. So he went into an A1 cell, which is for people who were there for dangerous or violent crimes. And that just so happened to also be Vicky's cell. The jail was so overcrowded at this point, some inmates talked about how they had to sleep on the floor with just a piece of foam because that's all they had. And sometimes there were 16 inmates in an 8-person cell. Some of the inmates were nervous about being with Casey because of his violent tendencies. At one point, he, and I quote, stabbed another inmate with a quote-unquote inmate-made knife. Also, it should be noted that Casey was 6'9". This is a big man. And when you see him on the videotapes, it's not like he's tall and very thin. He's big and wide. He is a very strong, intimidating sized person. Casey was smart. He was charming. He could also be friendly and extremely manipulative. A woman who worked at the jail said she opened the cage door and Casey said to her, "It's been 5 long years since I've touched a woman. Do you think I could get a hug?" And she said, "Hell no," and closed the cage door. And she went on to talk about how strong you have to be mentally to be a woman who works with male inmates. And I can't imagine how hard that would be. I am the type of person who's like, you're just going through a hard time now. Give me a hug. Like, I would be like, he'd be like, can I have a hug? And I'd be like, sure, you just need a hug. I could never work with people, and not even just men, but women or, juveniles. Like, it's hard for me to wrap my brain around the fact that these are criminals. And I'd be like, oh, you're just having a hard time right now. It would not go well for me, let me tell you. There's a fine line between female correctional officers and male inmates, and it's a very gray, thin line. One of Vicky's jobs was to listen to inmates' phone calls, watch them on tape, and even expose correctional officers who brought in contraband to the inmates. This was a job she took pride in and she absolutely loved, and there was not going to be anybody that got away with any wrongdoing under her watch. A couple of inmates noticed that when Vicky would visit the cell to give Casey his legal mail, he would hand her something back. He was also seen buying love cards from the commissary, which he said were for his mother, but the envelopes were never addressed to anybody. The women in the front office were a very tight-knit family. They talked about everything, but also the space in there was extremely small, and they were all cramped next to each other, so nothing was really private. But these women worked with each other day in and day out, and they pretty much knew everything about each other. Vicky was never known to really have a dating life, and how could you when you work all the time? But around Christmas time, Vicky showed the girls a couple of Christmas cards that she had received, but one of them had money in it. 2 $100 bills to be exact. But it wasn't the money that stuck out to one of the women. It was the way that it was folded inside of the card. And one of the women who worked in the front office took a look at it immediately and knew that that card was from an inmate. April 28th, a Thursday, Vicky had finally decided she had had enough. She had handed in her retirement paperwork, which was put as active for the next day, but she decided that it was time to finally start doing something for herself. Everyone felt like something was off with Vicky. Her coworkers could tell that she was just different. Friday, April 29th, 2022, was just another regular day. However, the jail was short-staffed because some of the command staff was out of town and they needed help with inmate transport. On top of all of the schedule juggling and people coming in on their days off because they were short-staffed, it was officially Vicky's last day. So they got her a cake and they had a small celebration for her around 9 a.m. She seemed quiet and distant and not her usual self. She ends up going up to a coworker and a friend of hers, and she tells her, "Open your hand." And the coworker opens her hand and she's like, "What is this for?" And Vicky ends up handing her her brass that she wears every day. After all of this was over, Vicky asked another officer to bring Casey up to booking and shackle him so she could transport him. At 9:30 is when you see the footage of Vicky and Casey leaving the jail to get into the car. Casey gets in back, shackled, and Vicky gets in the driver's seat. Another female coworker was also transporting a very dangerous inmate to another location, and she had texted Vicky telling her that she was taking this inmate out just in case anything happened to her for safety precautions. And Vicky never responds, which is not like her. She answers every phone call, she answers every text message. Everyone knew that she was taking Casey to the courthouse because he needed a mental evaluation, and everyone also knew how long that takes. But by 3 p.m., everyone started to get worried about what was going on. They tried calling Vicky, and she's not answering her phone. They started calling some of the other officers that maybe were at the courthouse or if they had seen or heard from Vicky, and nothing. They told them that Vicky left with Casey in the morning and she wasn't back and no one could get a hold of her, and that sent everyone into a panic because of Casey. He's large, he's dangerous, and he's alone with Vicky. They needed to move as fast as possible. They immediately put out a bolo, which is a be on the lookout for Vicky and Casey. They found out that Vicky's car, her squad car, is in a shopping store parking lot, and they immediately go there. But when they open the car, they find handcuff keys, Casey's jail shoes, and they realize at this point that there was no way that Casey could have gotten out of this car on his own, and that Vicky was involved in whatever was going on. They are doing everything they can to figure out what is going on. So one of the officers that works for her goes back through the footage so that she could maybe find anything, any sort of clue, and she does. And what she finds absolutely shocks her. There is a protocol that whenever you leave with an inmate, you have to be behind them. But when they watch the footage, Vicky opens the door casually, letting Casey out, and he's walking behind her. And she drags her fingers along the door, allowing him to catch the door, and walks out and casually puts him in the car. Everyone is in complete shock when they found out that Vicky went willingly with Casey. They immediately went to Vicky's house. They were armed. They were prepared to do whatever they needed to, including arresting their assistant director and friend. They ended up being confronted by Vicky's mom, and when the police told her why they were there, she was absolutely shocked. Vicky lived with her parents, and they were flabbergasted by the fact that this was happening. They asked to search the house, and everything Vicky would need was there. Her driver's license, her purse, her credit cards. But then they find a checkbook, and they see that Vicky has withdrawn a lot of money. They end up figuring out that Vicky had another phone to which they had checked in their system, and they were able to see that between 2020 and 2022, there were over 1,000 phone calls between Vicky and Casey. And because the inmates' calls are recorded, they have access to all of these phone calls between the two of them. And listening to these phone calls in the documentary is wild because you're hearing everything sort of happen in real time. Listening to some of the phone calls between Casey and Vicky is really sad. Vicky does not think much of herself at all. And it was hard for me at the time to not feel bad for her. Her self-worth is low. And it sort of gave me a better understanding of how something like this could happen. For 2 years, Vicky had a relationship with Casey. And when everyone was finally made aware, they were pissed. Vicky White betrayed every single person who trusted her. She was a good person. She was a hard worker. She believed in the work that they were doing. She busted other workers who were doing things they weren't supposed to be doing. A lot of people felt just absolutely betrayed. The sheriff has a press release, and he let everyone know that there is now a warrant out for Vicky's arrest. They call the FBI, the U.S. Marshals, and absolutely everyone gets to work. Now, a U.S. Marshal's job is to catch fugitives, which is what decorated Vicky White is now. But they knew that they had to move as fast as possible because Vicky knows what they're going to do. She knows what the protocols are. She knows how they're going to think, where they're going to look, what they're going to look for. And it's almost like she has a leg up now. So they decide to dig deep. What has Vicky been doing in the past 2 years? And she did not make this easy. She would go grocery shopping, and every time she would go, she would pick up one piece of camping gear so she could slowly accumulate over time what she needed before it was time to leave. Honestly, very smart. Along with the camping gear, she also bought firearms and a good amount of ammunition. When they left in the police vehicle, they had another vehicle about 35 miles from Florence, which just by chance the police were able to find on a camera. So now they have an idea of what type of vehicle they were in. They couldn't tell the make or the model, but they could tell the color. It was some sort of SUV, maybe red, maybe orange. And the police officer actually said that was being interviewed at the time that had she parked 1 or 2 spaces over, the camera would have never picked her up. It was just by luck that they caught her on the camera. But somehow they ended up locating a car dealer that sold Vicky an orange Ford Edge. They don't have a license plate or a direction of which they went, and at this point, they've been on the run for 4 days. So the police go back to the prison. They start interrogating the inmates, those who were in the same cell as Casey, those who knew Vicky, and one of the inmates ends up telling them how it all starts. Vicky was walking down the hallway. Casey said, "You have a nice ass." And they started talking from there. One of the inmates said that Casey truly cared for Vicky. He would get super excited when she would come by. He would write love letters to her, and he would ask the guys how to spell different words like gorgeous. And this inmate actually says because Vicky was assistant director, by just passing her those letters, he could have gotten in huge trouble, more time, being in segregation, and so on. The officers had to listen to all of the phone calls, and they had to hear a lot of phone sex. I can't imagine just listening to your friend or coworker having phone sex. I mean, with an inmate, but with anybody. But as they dig deeper, they find out that Vicky and Casey have had sex in the jail. Which, ballsy, I gotta say, extremely ballsy, if you ask me. That's insane. Vicky would tell the inmates that it was yard time, and Casey would stay back because he had to take a phone call from his lawyer. So she would go to his cell. She would leave the door open enough. It was closed, but it didn't latch, because if you latched it and she would have had to call somebody to let her out. So she left it just open enough so that the door didn't connect. And then they would do it. As upset as everyone was with Vicky, they were truly scared for her. They were convinced that once Casey was far enough, he wouldn't need to use her anymore. And they were concerned he would dispose of her. During the investigation, they started looking at Vicky's computer and they find that she started looking into inmates' unclaimed property, which is something that she was in charge of inside of the jail. And she was looking up IDs for both her and Casey. She even ends up asking one of the inmates for fake IDs, which I think is risky, if you ask me. She told him that it was because she was going to Mexico, which, why would you need a fake ID for Mexico? They find out that Vicky put her house on the market and only made $95,000 when it was actually worth so much more. But she wanted to sell it fast, and she was trying to get rid of absolutely everything she owned. And she had 2 years to do it. Day 5 of the manhunt, which all of this information feels like I've been watching this documentary for weeks. I gotta tell you, there's so much information, but it's day 5. That's it. And in the grand scheme of things, it's really only been days. But that tells you how crucial time is in cases like this. The police are now all over the news. They're asking for her to turn herself in. They're offering the public $10,000. They are plastering themselves everywhere to kind of close this bubble of where Vicky and Casey could go. And they did that because at this point they have nothing. Vicky had truly took the time and planned this whole thing out. She knew exactly what was going to happen, when it was going to happen, and they were ahead. And the media went wild with this story. Even Dog the Bounty Hunter makes an appearance, which I have my thoughts, but it went viral. There were actually people rooting for them to get away. We're on to day 7, and there is still almost nothing. No tips on the car. No tips on Casey, who is 6'9". How do you just that is not an average height. That is a height that you look at somebody and you take notice. So how he got this far away, I don't know. But then someone calls in with a tip. A tow company had towed the orange Ford Edge in Spring Hill, Tennessee. And that's because the tow truck driver was watching the news and was like, I need to make a phone call. When they find the car, Vicky and Casey actually tried to spray paint the car a completely different color. So the police are continuously watching Vicky on the tapes at the jail. And they find out that this is not the first time that she has left with Casey. She has done a dry run. 3 days before the escape, Vicky had taken Casey out of the jail. She told her coworkers Casey had to go to the courthouse and no one really asked her. And she didn't really tell. He's got to go. I got to take him. She runs the jail. Everybody trusts her. Why would anybody ask questions? They're gone for less than 10 minutes, but when they pull back in to the little bay that they have to get back into the jail, there is a patrol car, which means that there is someone in the booking area. And to get back into the jail to where Casey needs to go, you have to walk through the booking area. And if she does that, they're going to ask questions. And if Vicky is seen with Casey at this time, she would have been in huge trouble. But she ends up bringing Casey through a side door, completely avoiding booking and all the people that are inside it, walking back into the hallway and bringing Casey right back into his cell. My mouth hit the floor. The police are still working with the media, keeping the story alive, just trying to find these two. They're just trying to figure out where they're at this point. And it's Spring Hill, Tennessee, because they put out patrols in that area to see if anybody had seen them or talked to them or heard from them. There was a man who was selling vehicles out of his front yard. He says that he sold Casey a Ford F-150. And right after that, the police get another break. This is what I remember, this little news snippet. I'll add a picture to see if you remember this. But the F-150 has been sitting in a car wash bay for a day with the keys still inside it, but no one was there. And where is the car wash? Indiana. So on day 11, the police go straight to this car wash in Indiana. But they had been beaten there by the media. Because the same man who called the police also called the media, which is a huge blow to this investigation because they didn't want Vicky or Casey to know how close or far they were from catching them. They didn't want to know that they were onto their cars. They didn't even want them to think that they were following them. They just wanted them to keep going without any knowledge of what the police were doing at all. The owner of this car wash has cameras that work. So they go through the footage. They see Casey driving the truck into the bay, putting a gun into his waistband, and then he gets out. And on another camera, they see a gray Cadillac pulling up. And as he goes and gets into the car, they notice it's being driven by Vicky. In 11 days, they only drove 289 miles. Only 3 states up. They could have driven so much further. So they put out patrol cars, and they finally see a gray Cadillac at a motel in Indiana. The police find out that Vicky and Casey ordered pizza to room 150, and the pizza delivery guy was able to positively identify both Casey and Vicky. But they can't just knock on the door because, remember, they're also stocked up on firearms, so they have to be careful. They also know what Casey is capable of. But the wild card now is Vicky. They have no idea what she's capable of. They thought that they knew who she was, but they don't. And another thing is, if they did get Vicky, she was going straight to jail. She was going back to the place that she had watched over for so long. And sometimes when we have nothing to lose, we become the most dangerous. They call an armored vehicle and SWAT, but then both Vicky and Casey come out. They get in the car and they start driving. And they knew they were being followed. Somehow inside of the vehicle, 911 was called, and you can hear everything going on. And it's just chaotic. The police end up pushing their car into a ditch. You can hear Vicky yelling at Casey, getting mad at Casey, and saying, "Let's just get out and run." But the car crashes, and you hear one single gunshot. You hear the police say as they're running up to the car, she's got a gun in her hand. All the police surrounded the car. They grab Casey, they pull him out of the car, and he tells them repeatedly, "Please check on my wife." Vicky is in the car with a firearm. They pull Vicky out, but she wasn't conscious. And there was a lot of blood. She was immediately transported to the hospital. And on the body cam footage, all Casey did was ask, "Is my wife okay?" Vicky ended up passing away at the hospital. One of the officers ended up going to tell her parents directly because he didn't want them to hear it on the news. And they were devastated. Vicky White would never in a million years do anything like this. Everyone was devastated. The news reported that Vicky died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Everyone listened to the call hoping she wasn't the one that pulled the trigger. But amongst all the chaos, you couldn't really tell over the phone. One of the police officers said that the bullet wound was a really strange placement for a self-inflicted gunshot wound. But my thought is, if you're driving, right, and you're holding a firearm in your hand and you're driving on and off the road and in grass and in ditches and you're getting hit by police cars, I can't imagine that you would have a steady hand. The officers that worked with her were thinking maybe it was an accidental shot, but the reports say that the gunshot went off after the crash. Casey White was put in a maximum security prison. He was charged with escape in the first degree and indicted on felony murder for causing the death of Vicky White. He is currently serving a life sentence, which he was already serving 75 years before that. So I don't know if that's with this, on top of this. I don't know. They didn't say what that meant. Netflix has an interview with him at the end of the documentary, and they asked, "What did you think would happen after you escaped?" And he said he thought that they would get away with it. I really don't know what to think after watching this. I really wanted to be mad at Vicky. I really did. But I'm not. I think she was lonely. And I think sometimes when people look your way and you're in a vulnerable space, you can make really bad choices. And I'll tell you, sometimes red flags look like six flags, okay? And I really want to hope that Casey truly loved her. I really hope that she felt love when she left instead of Casey just using her and manipulating her. As far as the gunshot wound goes, I think it could have been accidental, absolutely. I think when you're holding a firearm in a police chase and you have cars ramming you and you're going up and down hills and on grass and you crash into a ditch, I think anything can happen. I know they broke the law and it's unfortunate. There was a part of me that wanted to see them be able to like be together, I guess. I don't know. Like I love, but also like legally. Like it was really sad. It's all just a really sad ending. And I think the most unfortunate thing, obviously, besides the fact that Vicky's gone now, is that she worked so hard to be the best at what she did. And she then made a choice. And this is all she'll ever be remembered for. And I really think that's a shame. The story of Vicky and Casey White is as tragic as it is compelling. A reminder that sometimes love leads us down the most dangerous paths. Whether you believe Vicky was manipulated or acting out of her own loneliness, one thing is for sure. This story is one for the ages. I hope this deep dive into Love on the Run has left you with just as many questions as it did me. And let me know your thoughts in the comments. Do you think it was true love or a deadly mistake? And if you haven't watched it yet, definitely check out the Netflix documentary. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on more mind-blowing stories. And until next time, stay curious, stay kind, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next video.